In this video, let's compare deontology and utilitarianism so that we can understand their nuanced differences. They are very different normative ethical theories, but each one is telling you what you should and should not do, and each one is giving you rules according to which you should act if you want to act ethically, morally, permissibly, and do what you're obligated to do. So what are their differences? That's what this video is going to be about. And I'm going to teach you a little bit about each one so that we can compare and contrast them and see their differences. So we're looking at different normative ethical theories. Let's write that down. Normative ethical theories, normative ethics. Norm is the standards that you should act according to which you can be ethical. And ethics is, of course, your actions being good or bad, right or wrong, doing your obligation or going against your obligation. And when you're looking at normative ethical theories, one of those theories is utilitarianism, the one based on Jeremy Bentham's idea of utility. And there's another one, deontology, based on Immanuel Kant's theory of duty and obligation. There's also Aristotle's idea of virtue ethics. There's also natural law theory from St. Thomas Aquinas. There's all these different theories that tell you what you should and should not do. What are their differences? Let's focus on utilitarianism and deontology. I'm going to start by making a chart so that you can see the differences pretty clearly. U is going to stand for utilitarian, and D is going to stand for deontology. Here's one difference. Utilitarianism is a consequentialist theory. Deontology is not a consequentialist theory. Consequentialism is the idea that you should judge an action based on the consequences, based on what it produces. So you're thinking if stealing is permissible or impermissible. And if you ask a deontologist, is stealing moral? A deontologist doesn't need to know any more information. They can just say, no, it's not, because stealing fails the categorical imperative in deontology, so you just know that it's wrong to steal. But in utilitarianism, you don't just know that stealing is wrong. Stealing is not objectively wrong. It depends on the consequences. It depends on the context. A utilitarian, if you ask them if stealing is wrong, they need to know who stole, why did they steal, what happened after they stole. Did the person who stole just need food and the person who had food stolen from them had their food reimbursed? Then maybe that's best for everyone involved. Then it would be fine, according to utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is a consequentialist theory. You can't just say that something is flat out wrong. What is right or wrong in utilitarianism is subjective. It depends on the consequences, but not in deontology. So that's one huge difference. Here's another difference between utilitarianism and deontology. Utilitarianism is, but deontology is not, a hedonistic theory. Hedonism is this underlying value theory about hedon, which means something like well-being or pleasure or happiness. In hedonism, your goal in life is to seek out as much simple pleasure as possible and to minimize as much pain or suffering as possible. And in utilitarianism, there is an underlying value of hedon, of pleasure and well-being and happiness. Utilitarianism say what is right and what is wrong depends on what produces pleasure and produces pain. In utilitarianism, the act is a good act if it produces or creates the most pleasure possible. Even if what you're doing sounds bad in the short term, if in the long term it produces much more happiness than the suffering it causes, then it's a fine act, but not in deontology. In deontology, you don't figure out what's right and wrong based on who has pleasure or how much pleasure. In fact, Immanuel Kant tells us that what is moral, what is ethical, what is right, should have nothing to do with what is pleasurable or what feels good or our emotions. You don't want to be a slave to your emotions. You don't want to be trying to bring about pleasurable outcomes. And so deontology is not about the outcomes, and it's also not about pleasure. Here's a third category that helps us see a huge difference between utilitarianism and deontology. Now, if we were to actually study these concepts, we would see that there are analyses to be made. These are not synonymous, and they mean very different things in philosophy. But if we put them together here for the purposes of comparing utilitarianism and deontology, I think that's fine. Utilitarianism is not. Utilitarianism is not a objective theory or a universal theory or an absolute theory. In utilitarianism, what is moral or immoral is not objective. It depends on what brings about the most well-being, your definition of well-being, to the majority of invested parties, and it's up to you to decide who you think is being affected and who you're not affecting. Like, does your act need to consider how this act will affect people 5 generations from now? In utilitarianism, you get to set the parameters for who or what is in the moral community that we're considering when we're trying to bring about consequences that lead the most amount of people the best off considering their well-being. So utilitarianism is not objective or universal or absolute, because you need to answer all of these questions about who we're even counting, what pleasure even means, and how far into the future we're considering the consequences of our acts. Deontology is, but utilitarianism is not an objective, universal, or absolute theory. In deontology, what is moral is objective, and it applies to everyone, everywhere, always. It is universal. It is also absolute. In utilitarianism, that's not the case. So here are 3 different ways that we can compare utilitarianism and deontology and see that they are opposites.